In this latest episode of bug hunting, we're going to deal with the rotation bug. Now, if you're doing rotations and the rotations are instantaneous like this one, there's no problem. The bug happens, but the bug is hidden. You'll never see it. So if you don't need it to be slow moving and smooth and animated and everything, you do your rotations like this and they'll work just fine. But if we take a look at when we spend a little time on our animations, so they slide, and notice you get that reversal. And it happens in either direction. So if we go backwards this way, it happens there as well. There's a confusion that happens right around the 0/360 mark of a rotation where it gets confused and it'll go in the opposite direction. When you're doing it instantaneously, like I showed you before, it's invisible because you can't tell what direction it went in. It just appears where you would tell it to go. So it's not a problem. But when you've got an animated rotation going on, then you actually see it happen. And it won't break anything. I mean, it'll still end up where you want it to be, but it can look very weird. So we need to come up with a solution for that. And unfortunately, the solution is not going to come from a bug fix because Monk says that it's a Foundry problem and Foundry says that it's a Monk problem. And they just keep pointing at each other. So we've got to come up with a workaround. And unfortunately, we're going to get a bit into the weeds on this one. So we're going to be using something. Bring it up here. I have a couple of examples set up. There we go. This is known as a ternary operation. And basically it's an if then else statement, all boiled down into one line, right? So you have the equal sign, which is it's assigning whatever all this does to whatever it is you want. You have your condition, your if statement in brackets, followed by a question mark, followed by what you want it to return if this condition is true, followed by a colon, followed by whatever you want it to return if this condition is false. And if you want a little bit of extra functionality, you can add in some error checking. All right. So in the condition, you have whatever it is you're testing for. But if you're not entirely sure what is contained here, like it might be invalid. You're trying to check for a number, for example, but you're not entirely sure that what you're checking might just contain a null value or an undefined value or whatever. So to be safe, you can put in this double pipe symbol, which is shift \, and then assign a default value here. So if this doesn't contain a valid value, then use whatever this default is. That way you never get an error of invalid information. And then again, question mark, if true, colon, if false. Okay. So to show that in practice, I have an animated ring here that you can rotate this around as often as you want in either direction, and you'll never run into that bug. Okay. But we got to put some work in to get it to work that way. So we look at what's going on here. And as you can see, it's not nearly as simple as the basic tile, which is just click, rotate, right click, rotate the other way. So you got to put some work in if you want something that will rotate all the way around past 360 degrees and do so repeatedly and smoothly with animation and without bugging out. So this is only necessary if you want this very specific circumstance. But if you do, this is what you need to do. Now, this extra section down here, this manual trigger, this is just to allow me to change the interval of how far it rotates each time. So like I can change this from 45 degrees to 90 degrees. So there are less steps in the rotation. And then I can just, oops, I shouldn't have done that. I right click on it. I do a manual activation, which locks in that change to 90 degrees. And now it rotates in fewer steps. So that's all that is. So if you don't want to be able to change this, then you don't need this extra step. But these two steps you do need. Now, the first thing you'll notice is I've got a continue if triggered. It's monitoring the trigger history. And the reason why I'm doing that is because one of the problems you're going to run into is if you're rapidly clicking and forcing this to rotate faster, you'll notice the bug happens more often, right? So what I'm doing here is until I'm completely finished the animation and the calculations and everything, you can't click on it again. So no matter how rapidly I click on this, it's only going to rotate at its set speed, nothing more, nothing less. So we put in a continue if it's only triggered one time, which is the time that I clicked on it. It does everything it needs to do, and then it resets the trigger history, allowing it to trigger again. So that's what those two lines are for. And they're only necessary if you're concerned about a situation where someone might be clicking on it more rapidly than it takes to do its animation. So I recommend putting that in. It's not a lot of extra work, and it's a safety catch to prevent that from happening. So no matter how rapidly you click on this, it will animate exactly as it's supposed to animate, and it won't mess up. Now we get into the weeds. So we're going to do a couple of rotation operations each time it clicks. And you're like, okay, well, why? It's only supposed to rotate once each time I click. And the reason why we have two of them is we need to check for, am I going to hit that 0/360 mark, which causes the confusion? If I am, I need to do something about it. So what we're going to do is we're doing that ternary operation, right? So this is the initial condition in these two brackets. Let me cursor over just a little bit so you can see the extra bracket, right? So we're taking the tile's current rotation and we're adding the interval, how far we're going to rotate it. Does that, when it's done, is it going to be less than 360 degrees? If it is, then we don't have a problem. It's not crossing the 360 mark. We're not going to have any confusion. So we're just going to return the rotation plus the interval. We're going to let it just go ahead and do its thing. Otherwise, stop at 359 degrees, one short of that confusing 360 mark. And then we just set our duration of how fast we want the rotation animation to happen. Then we wait the amount of time the rotation is set to take. So in here, we're having it set to take half a second to do its rotation. So we wait a half a second and wait for that rotation animation to finish. Then we come in and we do a quick little correction. If our tile rotation is now at 359, then jump instantaneously, no animation, to 0. If it's not 359, then just leave it where it is. So we're returning the current tile rotation without changing it. And that is the fix that prevents the animation from passing that 360 mark by instantaneously teleporting 1 degree to 0 to reset our rotation. Now, when we're going in the opposite direction, we're doing something similar, but a little bit different because we're passing that 360/0 mark in the opposite direction. So if the tile is at 0 before the rotation happens, so it's sitting at 0 and we've clicked, we want it to rotate down past 0, then set it to 359 instantaneously. If it's not 0, then just leave it where it is. We wait 1/10 of a second to make sure this change happens. And then we do another rotation operation where we check, did we just put ourselves at 359? If we did, we don't want our rotations to be off by 1 degree from that point forward. So instead of going from where we are, which is 359, we're going to do our calculations from 360. And then we subtract our interval, which again, you don't have to use a variable here. You can just manually put in 45 or 90 or 180 or whatever amount you want to rotate. If you don't want that amount to ever change, you can just hard code it in. And then a colon, and then the otherwise. And in the case of the otherwise or else, we're going to take its current rotation minus the interval. And again, we set our animation interval, 0.5 seconds. And then we wait 0.5 seconds, allowing the animation to complete. And then we reset the tile trigger history so that it can be clicked on again. And then just for the manual activation, for those who want to be able to on the fly change, we just assign a variable, which is the degrees of interval, and then reset the tile trigger history, because a manual trigger is still counted as a trigger. And that would prevent these from ever working again if we didn't reset the tile trigger history when we're done. So obviously a lot more steps and a lot more work and a bit more complicated. But this way, you can have an animated rotation that goes in any number of steps at any speed of animation, and you can have it go around past 0/360 as often as you want, and it'll never mess up. It's a pain, but unfortunately, since this bug is most likely never going to get fixed, this is what you got to do in order to get around it. There is another way of doing it. Rather than using these ternary operations, you could use a series of, where are we here? Come down here, and it is filter by attribute. You go this tile, and the attribute is rotation. And then you're checking to see if the value is 0 or 360. And then you would then come down here, check entity count. And we'd be checking for current tiles. And if the number is greater than 0, then we know that the tile is sitting at 0 or 360. And then we could have a jump here to jump to different logic. I find this is just a whole bunch of extra steps and kind of clunky. It'll work. It certainly works. Don't give me the wrong idea. Although the individual entries here can seem a little daunting and more complicated, this is more efficient. A lot less lines, a lot less jumping between different landings, which can get spaghetti code-ish pretty quickly, in my opinion. So I find this is a better way to handle it. But either way will work. Again, hopefully you guys found this interesting, found it helpful. Have a good one.